an interview with Jean Cox. Jean, can you begin by telling me when Ron used to come to the Last of Us meetings, what was he like, and what sort of party tricks did he used to sort of do?
Well, when he first showed up, this was in April of 1948, he was a very well-known science fiction writer at that time, and the Last of Us, of course, was a science fiction club. And he had written some very popular stories, Fear and Final Blackout, and also one that was pretty good, Typewriter in the Sky. So he was an honored guest, a popular guest. The amazing thing to me was that, and the disturbing thing, when as I gradually became conscious of it, was how he seemed to be putting everybody on, to be pulling their leg or leading them down their garden path. And he did this with everybody. And he told just one fantastic story after the other. During the first meeting he was there, he mentioned Excalibur. This was a book that he had written when he was dead for 8 minutes, after he was dead for 8 minutes, in which he had had a glimpse of the various mysteries of life. And but he didn't, at the first meeting, he didn't say very much about that. He said he couldn't talk about that just now. It was too terrific to talk about. But 2 weeks later, he showed up again. He gave a little talk. He talked about Stalin. He said that Stalin was being given the benefits of a limited immortality serum, that Stalin wasn't getting any older, and that he probably would live for a very, very long time. Of course, Stalin died in 1953, just 5 years later. But at that meeting, he did tell us something about Excalibur. It seems that, according to him, when he was on the operating table, he'd been dead for 8 minutes, and during this time, he had this vision of kind of a smorgasbord of philosophies and truths. And afterwards, he'd written these up in his book, Excalibur. He'd submitted it to various publishers. 4 of the readers of the publishers had gone insane. And so he had then taken the book and locked it away into a bank vault. Then later, when he came out with Dianetics, he said that Dianetics was based on just one chapter of Excalibur. So what the other chapters would have been like, I don't know.
Now, he also, at the meetings, he used to practice hypnotism, didn't he?
Yes, right.
Can you tell me about that?
Yes. Well, the first person he tried to hypnotize was me, but he was unable to do it. And he concluded that the reason is that I had a block against being hypnotized. And he thought that this block had been implanted in me by some previous hypnotist. I was 19 years old, just out of high school. But he had more success with some of the other members, like Mike Scholes, Seth Shepard, Rex Ward, and my brother, Bill Cox. These were all young guys, just in their teens. He didn't bother with the older members, the people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. But what he would do, he would hypnotize them, then he'd have them do various little tricks, or subject them to various delusions. Like Seth Shepard would look through a drinking glass, and as if it were a lens, and he would see kangaroos cavorting. And another person held a conversation with an imaginary used car salesman who was trying to sell him a car, holding his hand to his ear. Then again, he'd have some members, he'd tell them that the floor was becoming so warm they'd have to take off their shoes. And various little things like that, things that were really rather humiliating to the people who performed the tricks. I should mention that the reason he couldn't hypnotize me is I didn't want to be hypnotized by him. I was offended by his condescending manner. He, for instance, when he began, he had a string with a little lead weight at the bottom of it, and he moved this around in a circle. And he told me that this weight was being moved by an electromagnetic field. And apparently he actually expected me to believe that. And of course I was a little insulted by that, so I wasn't interested.
Did he seem to take pleasure out of humiliating people then?
Well, he took pleasure in hypnotizing them, certainly. I don't know, humiliating them. But of course the chief thing is he hypnotized my brother several times. My brother apparently was very suggestible and very easily hypnotizable. And of course, he could get him to do just about anything. One thing he'd do, he gave Bill a suggestion or an order that anytime he touched his nose, Bill would fall asleep. And on one occasion, apparently, Hubbard while we're in the club room, Hubbard just thoughtlessly touched his nose and Bill fell asleep. But Forey Ackerman was standing behind him and he caught Bill as he fell. This is Forey Ackerman's favorite story about the period, by the way. Often tells it. Now, after, I should mention too that A.E. Van Vogt, who was at that time a more prominent science fiction writer than Hubbard, was also interested in hypnotism, and he was experimenting with hypnotism. But he was doing so in a different style and a different mood. He was genuinely interested in just researching hypnotism. And one of his closest friends was a man named Charles E. Cook, who was a professional hypnotist and hypnotherapist. I should mention that on one occasion, Hubbard hypnotized a young fellow named Seth Shepard, and then he forgot to bring him out of the hypnotic spell. And so for about a week, Seth walked around, presumably still in the hypnotic condition, and he said he had gotten a headache during that time. But Van Vogt took pity on him and hypnotized him at the next meeting and brought him out of the hypnosis. After Hubbard moved back east and was conferring with John D. Campbell Jr., who was the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, which was the premier science fiction magazine at that time, we began to hear rumors of a new science of mind or a new revelation that Hubbard had invented, and which was going to appear in Astounding Science Fiction. I had a friend named Bill Hine at Harvard, and he had some idea of writing an essay on general semantics or the Ames relaxation exercise or something. And he wrote to Campbell suggesting that he might do something along that line. He got a letter back from Campbell saying that soon a new science of mind is to be revealed in Astounding Science Fiction, which would include all those as just as sub-sciences. I took this letter over to Van Vogt's place. I showed it to him, but he had already received a similar letter from Campbell. And in fact, already rumors were beginning to circulate that this new science of mind, or this new philosophy, had a significance for mankind that was greater than the discovery of the wheel and equal in significance to the discovery of fire. So of course everybody was very eager to learn more about that.
Okay.
And
just before we get on too much into Dianetics, just want to ask you one more thing about before that.
Yeah.
When you met Hubbard, you remembered his name, didn't you? Tell me about how you remembered seeing his name in a newspaper article, and also about his reluctance to be photographed.
Well, that same year that he showed up at the last fast, there was an item in the Los Angeles Times about an L.R. Hubbard who had been arrested and charged with passing a bad check, and he was arraigned in a court in San Gabriel. He pleaded not guilty at first, and then later he pleaded guilty. But the curious thing is that no member of the club either saw this or else recognized that the L.R. Hubbard could be the L. Ron Hubbard that we knew. Perhaps he used his initials just for that reason. However, one of the curious things about Hubbard at that time, 1948 at least, is that he would not allow himself to be photographed. When some member of the club would try to take a picture of him, he would forbid it. There was a magazine called Writers, Markets, and Methods that did a series of articles. It was a local magazine, Los Angeles magazine. Did a series of articles on science fiction, on various prominent science fiction writers. And they had articles on A.E. Van Vogt, Ray Bradbury, and Hubbard. The cover on each issue was illustrated with a photograph of Van Vogt or Ray Bradbury. But for Hubbard's issue, there was a drawing of Hubbard, not a photograph. Of course, just a few years later, he had no objection at all to being photographed. But at that time, he did. And the feeling that I had myself is that he didn't want to be photographed. He was got somebody might see the photograph and recognize it.
Now, we've talked a little bit about Dianetics and when it began. Who were the sorts of people who started turning up to LastFast at that time with interest about Dianetics? And what did they believe, we're just going to wait for this plane, what did they believe that this new, amazing new science was going to be able to actually achieve?
Ordinarily, the meetings at the LastFast, there'd be 12 or 15 people who were the regular members. But just before Dianetics broke onto the national scene, suddenly people started showing up out of nowhere. The meetings were crowded and swamped. There'd be 30 or 45 people there. All of them were interested in this new science of mind. Nobody had even heard the name Dianetics yet. But these people apparently knew that this was something that they would be interested in. Mainly, I think they were people who were interested in occultism and spiritualism and things of that sort. I remember talking to one woman, and she kept referring to Dr. Hubbard. So I corrected her, and I said, well, no, he's not a doctor. His background is in engineering. Of course, I was wrong about that. He had no background in engineering. He flunked out of George Washington University after just in his second year. She wondered why people were so skeptical of this new science, whatever it should prove to be. And Van Vogt was there, and he said, well, he thought it was because he leaned forward in his usual very cheerful and positive manner, said it's because Hubbard had been sleeping with the wives of so many people, and which seemed preposterous, because actually almost everybody rejected Dianetics, which would mean that Hubbard had been very busy indeed.
Jean, when Dianetics was launched, what was this amazing new science meant to be able to do?
It was meant to do just about everything, to cure every illness and to solve all the world's problems. Among the various things it said to be able to do was one person had lost a tooth, and through Dianetic auditing, he regrew the tooth. And almost any illness could be cured. Schizophrenia could be cured. Campbell, in a letter that I saw, said that he and some other Dianeticists had gone into a mental hospital and where there was a friend who was a patient there, and they had practically forced this friend against the wall and had forcibly audited him and had cured him of schizophrenia.
Now, you went along to the great display at Shrine Auditorium, didn't you?
Yeah.
Tell me about that day.
Yeah. Well, later in 1950, Hubbard, who had been back east all this time, came to Los Angeles, and rather there was going to be a huge presentation. He was going to speak at the Shrine Auditorium, which is a large auditorium in Los Angeles. Of course, I had to attend it. I caught a streetcar there, going there, and the streetcar was very crowded. More and more people got on at every stop. It was like the New York subway at rush hour. But I thought that not everyone could be going to hear this talk. But when we got to the Shrine Auditorium, everyone got off except the driver. they were all going to hear L. Ron Hubbard. I managed to get in and to get a seat at the very back of the auditorium. Hubbard came out, followed by A.E. Van Vogt. They made various remarks and claims about Dianetics, what it could do. They brought in somebody whom they audited and cleared of a grief income. And somebody in the audience stood up and said, shouted that he thought that all this had been prearranged. So Hubbard invited this man, rather I should say that Hubbard was going to invite somebody from the audience up to the stage to talk to him. And the audience, which was extremely rowdy, it's been described as good humor, but it seemed to me to be very noisy and rowdy, kept shouting that this particular man who'd made this objection should be brought up. So he was, and Hubbard sat down with him in a couple of chairs face to face, talked to him for a while, but didn't come to anything. He just left. It was very, very anticlimactic. But then the climax of the evening was when he brought out a clear. One of the claims of Dianetics is that a person could be cleared of all ingrams, which would mean that they would be cleared of all neuroses, all illnesses, all incapacities. And he brought out this woman, Sonia Bianca, who was a student at some Eastern college, and she was supposed to be a clear. She was supposed to have total recall. She could recollect with photographic clarity everything she'd ever read, everything she'd ever experienced, and so forth. So various members of the audience called questions at her. Could she remember what was said on page 217 of her physics textbook? She couldn't. Could she remember what she had for breakfast on the morning of August 17th, 1946? She couldn't. Then various people called out for Hubbard to turn his back on her and see if she could remember the color of his tie. She couldn't. And so that was, at that moment, the whole business sort of collapsed. People started leaving the auditorium. A few days later, we were told that what had happened is that when Hubbard had called Sonia out from the wings, he had said to her, "Will you come out here now, Sonia?" And so when he used the word "now," he stuck her in present time, so that she was unable to remember these things from the past.
So that was the great excuse.
That was the great excuse, yes.
What, just to sum up, what did you make of the guy?
Hubbard? Well, I didn't believe a word he said on any subject. As I said, he was a respected science fiction writer, and so this is what amazed me: is that when I first met him, is that everything he said was unbelievable. When these rumors began reaching us in Los Angeles from the East Coast about this amazing new science of mind, Van Vogt got it into his head that Hubbard must have given various persons post-hypnotic suggestions. There was a young fellow in the club named Kenneth Monell who had a sort of a stuttering problem. And about this time, his stuttering began to clear up, or at least began to abate. And Van thought that that probably Hubbard had cured him of his stuttering, and also had probably given him some post-hypnotic suggestion concerning that. But anyway, he wanted to. It turned out that that Kenneth said that he'd had no connection with Hubbard, except he'd gone to see him on one occasion about what he called his psychological problems, whatever those were, and that Hubbard had advised him to read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But one of the persons who had been hypnotized in the club was Dale Hart. Dale Hart was a college student and a poet. He published a little poetry magazine called Icor, and Hubbard had hypnotized him on one occasion. Dale had mentioned that he was going to have an examination at school the next day, and he was worried about his grades. So Hubbard hypnotized him and told him that he would get all A's in his work. He didn't, of course. But of course, another person he hypnotized on several occasions was my brother Bill. Bill couldn't spell anything at all, so Hubbard tried to cure that by hypnotism. Bill thought it was because he had been ridiculed by a teacher that he had had at one time. So Hubbard had him recall this teacher, and then he physically, or seemingly physically, reached in and moved blocks from Bill's head, which were supposed to be the blocks that kept him from spelling well. And after that, he would be able to spell correctly. Of course, he couldn't. But anyway, after these stories began to circulate, and Van got into his head that Hubbard had given everybody post-hypnotic suggestions, it was decided to hypnotize Dale Hart and see if he'd been given a post-hypnotic suggestion. The reason why Van thought that is that once Dale had been visiting the home of Everett Evans and Louise LePere, and he told them that during the night a couple in his apartment block had been quarreling so loudly that finally he had to get up and close the window so as not to hear them. Hubbard was present at the time when he was telling this, and Hubbard said, no, that didn't actually happen. I was out strolling in my astral self, and I visited you, and I caused you to dream that. So Van thought that probably Hubbard had given Dale Hart a post-hypnotic suggestion. So a group of us, about 8 persons, went over to Dale's apartment, and among the 8 persons was Charles E. Cook, the professional hypnotist. He was going to hypnotize Dale and see what he could bring up. The others present were Van and Van's wife, myself and my brother, and I think Al Ashley. But just to warm up, they decided to try first with my brother, Bill, because he was so suggestible, he was so easily hypnotizable. So Charles Edward Cook hypnotized him, and sure enough, it turned out that Hubbard had given him a post-hypnotic suggestion. One evening at the club, he'd called Bill to one side, and he had told him to meet him the next day at 2 p.m. at the corner of Lucas and Wilshire. So the next afternoon, Bill was lying on the bed reading the newspaper. He had a very leisurely life in those days. It was my apartment. He was living with me. 2 o'clock came around. He got up. He walked to the corner of Wilshire and Lucas, which was just a couple of blocks away, and Hubbard was there waiting for him. First thing Hubbard did was to tell him to put his hands in his pockets. Then he told him he couldn't take his hands out of his pockets. Bill struggled to take his hands out of his pockets, but he couldn't. There was some construction work going on there, and there was a fence made out of the 2x4s. Hubbard told him to put his hands on the fence, which he did. Then he told him that he couldn't take his hands off the fence, so he struggled to take his hands off the fence. But then Hubbard told him that the fence was growing red hot, hotter and hotter, and that he still couldn't take his hands off the fence. So Bill was writhing and screaming and groaning when he couldn't take his hands off the fence. Then Hubbard released him, told him he could take his hands off the fence, laughed, clapped him on the shoulder, and told him he could go home. And all this came out at this session at Dale Hart's place. If just by accident, if Cook hadn't decided to warm up on Bill, to this date we would never know about this incident.
So what does that show about Hubbard the man, do you think?
Well, it was a very cruel thing to do. He was cruel. He was very, he was not at all reluctant to humiliate people and just to demonstrate his power over them.